when you heard the tone from President Zelensky, and now this morning to read in the FT that it was a shouting match, in fact, that took place? Are we all the way back to where we were following the first Oval meeting?
It's deja vu again, Joe.
Yeah.
It does feel like February. But look, Trump is a yo-yo. So I know that the actual, it doesn't feel so good right now, but I would say don't overreact. I think things are going to pull back. I think Trump will pull back from where he is now. So Trump has said, why doesn't Ukraine give up the Donbass in exchange for a little sliver of two very important pieces in southern Ukraine? It is a terrible deal. Ukraine will not take it. It is a non-starter. And I'd like to ask Donald Trump, what about the security guarantees? Where's the ceasefire and where are the security guarantees? Why on earth would Ukraine take this deal when there's no guarantee that Russia won't strike again?
Can you actually give us a little bit more context here when you hear the president say that we should stop right now at the battle line? What are these regions? Why are they so imperative to Russia's ambitions here? Just give us a little bit of why this has really been long a flashpoint in this conversation.
Sure. It's great to be with you, Tyler. So look, Ukraine is a huge country, and Russia occupies about 18% of it right now. You remember back in 2014, the boot of Ukraine, Crimea, was illegally annexed by the Russians, and there was a fake referendum. So that's one piece of the story that goes back to 2014. But the Russians also tried to take the Donbass, and this is two different provinces in eastern Ukraine. It's Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast, and they didn't manage to take very much of those provinces. Fast forward to February of 22, and the Russians surrounded Ukraine by three sides, and they tried to take and dismember the country. They came in from the north, from Belarus, and they tried to whack Zelensky in 3 days, and they failed. They were repelled. But a lot has happened since then. But this area out in the east is important because they've been fighting about it for a long time. But just to summarize it in a sentence, Russia is not an empire without Ukraine. So that's why it's so important, and that's why Russia can't let Ukraine go.
The president was asked in the White House a short time ago by a reporter about, it was only just a couple of weeks ago, he said that Ukraine was capable of winning back all of the land that Russia had occupied. He's singing a pretty different tune now, and was asked about that change in rhetoric, and he said they could win the war. He still, in fact, believes that. I just don't think they will. What did Vladimir Putin tell him in this phone call last week?
I'm dying to know, Joe. I have no idea, and I think everyone is dying to know. So, look, this is typical behavior. Let's take a broader perspective. Every time the U.S. decides to be more firm. Yeah. So it wasn't that long ago, 2 days, 3 days, that Trump was talking about giving the Ukrainians Tomahawks.
Yes.
This is up to 1,000 miles in range, right? This is a game changer. The war is over if Ukraine has enough long-range fires. I've talked to a lot of generals and brigade commanders in Ukraine, Joe, and they tell me if we have 2,000 long-range fires, they don't have to be Tomahawks, but they have to have long-range fire.
Moscow.
Yeah, to be able to hit behind enemy lines, command and control centers, and ammo depots. It's over. That's why this was such a big deal, and Moscow overreacted. So what does Vladimir Putin do? He gets on the phone with Trump, and he sweets talks him. I don't know what he offered him, but we do know one thing about Donald Trump. He's vain, and he really wants a Nobel Peace Prize. And he has, how many wars has he solved now? 8, 9?
Yeah.
I think he's claiming 9. So he knows that he's not going to get it until he can bring peace to Ukraine. So he's frustrated, and he's emotional, and he thinks that if he lashes out, he may cause the Ukrainians to capitulate. Ain't going to happen.
Well, keeping with this phone call that President Trump had with Vladimir Putin, the president came out of it saying that there potentially could be a face-to-face meeting in Hungary. We then had a headline on the Bloomberg terminal saying that Zelensky, despite his reservations about the venue, would like to be part of that conversation. Can you just talk a little bit about the geopolitical forces here if such a conversation was going to happen in Hungary?
So to my knowledge, Putin hasn't agreed yet, has he?
That there's nothing formal that we're aware of. Only from the truth do we know this.
So this is sort of the shocking part, is that Trump has made such an about face on the promise that Putin might appear in Budapest, and there's no commitment from the Kremlin. So I think Washington really gave a lot away on Friday for no good reason. But the geopolitics, I mean, look, Putin is delighted. They are mixing martinis. I was just looking at the Russian newspaper coverage. They are mixing martinis in Moscow tonight. They are so delighted. They think that the European Union is full of hypocrites, and they think they punched Zelensky in the stomach. That's one of the titles that I saw. So they are very, very happy with the outcome. And Hungary is not a place that's hospitable to the West, to Ukraine, to Western values. Remember, this is the home of Viktor Orban, and he's tight with Putin and also Trump.
So what would be the optics of a meeting like that? To think that Zelensky would show up, we just saw what took place in Alaska. Now we're going to have Viktor Orban essentially controlling the optics around a meeting between these two presidents with no preconditions. Is that the assumption?
I don't think it's going to happen, Joe.
You don't think the meeting takes place?
No, I don't think it's going to happen. Let's ignore the hysterics for a minute. The war is going to continue till at least next spring or summer. The Russians are going to continue at the same pace, the same intensity of the war right now until about Christmas. Something happens in Christmas, the leaves start to fall off trees, which means the Russians won't have as much air cover. So same intensity till Christmas, then it will diminish a little bit, and then as spring changes, there'll be another big push from the Russians. And the Russians are going to see what they can get. And they're going to see what kind of mood Donald Trump is in. And what does this mean? This means that human beings in Ukraine, children, women, elderly people are going to suffer. And the winter is going to be very hard. We see the Russians hitting the grid right now. I saw pictures of Kiev, a city of 4 million people, in pitch blackness. We're going to see more and more of this. And unfortunately, the U.S. government doesn't have anyone who's paying attention to the energy picture.